The rain came down like it had a grudge. Not the soft kind. Not the kind that taps on the window and lulls you to sleep. This rain hit the roof of the Merritt house like fists, like it was angry at something too. And on the front porch in that cold October night of 1885, a 19-year-old girl stood, with a single cloth bag in her hand. Her name was Win Merritt. Behind her, the door had just been shut. Not slammed. Shut. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of closing that says I meant it. Her stepmother's last words still hung in the wet air. A girl too clever has no place under my roof. Win's fingers shook as she tightened the strap of her bag. She hoped the dark hid it. She did not turn around. She did not knock. She did not beg. She just stood there, letting the rain soak through her dress, letting it run down her neck, letting it fill her boots until her toes went numb. She looked out into the dark. The town of Blackwood Hollow was down there somewhere, small, dim, sleeping. Not one lamp lit up for her, not one door open, not one voice calling her name, because she had no one. Because her father had died 9 months ago. Because a girl without a father is a girl without a shield. And her stepmother, Coralie, had figured that out fast. Win stepped off the porch. The mud grabbed her ankle. She almost fell. She caught herself on the fence post. And she kept walking. She did not know where she was going. Only where she was leaving. Somewhere up on the hill behind Blackwood Hollow, an old oak tree was waiting. 300 years old. Wider than a wagon, branches thick as a grown man's chest. Win did not know it yet. But that tree would save her life. And before the winter came, it would save the whole town. Inside that cloth bag she carried, there was not much. A change of clothes, a small book of poems from her mother, half an apple wrapped in cloth, $6.40 saved, from mending shirts for the dressmaker. A wooden comb her father had carved for her 10th birthday. That was her whole life. $6 and one comb. She walked past the general store. Dark. Past the church. Dark. Past the saloon. One candle in the window, and a man's laugh from inside. She kept her head down. She did not stop, because if she stopped, she might sit down in the mud. And if she sat down in the mud, she might not get up again. So she kept walking. To the edge of town, past the last house, past the old post fence, and there the abandoned livery stable. The roof was half gone, the walls leaned, the smell of old hay and mildew hit her the moment she ducked under the doorway. But it was dry, mostly, in one corner, under one beam that had not yet rotted through. Win sat down. She put her bag beside her. She wrapped her arms around her knees. She listened to the rain. She did not cry. She wanted to. Her chest was tight enough to break something. Her throat burned. But no tears came, because tears are for people who still hope somebody is listening. Nobody was listening, so Win closed her eyes. And she waited for morning. The morning came gray. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn. The world outside the livery smelled like wet pine and cold earth. Win opened her eyes and did not remember at first where she was. Then she remembered. She sat up slowly. Her dress was stiff. Her hair was tangled. Her back ached from the plank she had used as a pillow. She reached into her bag, pulled out the half apple, ate it in 3 bites, chewed slowly, because it might be the only thing she ate today. And then, because she did not know what else to do, she walked. Not toward town. Toward the hill behind it, the hill nobody used, too far from the creek, too steep for cattle, too rocky for planting, a useless slope of grass, and pine and one old road nobody remembered building. Win walked up it. Her wet skirt slapped against her legs. Her boots slipped on wet grass. She kept climbing, and then she saw it, the oak. She stopped. She had seen this tree 100 times before, from town. From the wagon road, from her bedroom window when she was a little girl. But she had never really looked at it. Now she looked. It was enormous. The trunk was wider than a wagon. The lowest branches, thick as a grown man's chest, reached out 30 feet from the ground. The canopy went up, so high she had to tilt her head all the way back to see the top. And at the middle of the tree, 25 feet up, 3 great branches split from the trunk. They formed a kind of cradle, a natural platform, a place where a person could stand, or sit, or live. Win's heart did something strange. It skipped, and then it settled, like a bird landing on a branch. She heard her father's voice. Sudden, clear, from years ago when she was maybe 7 years old, and he had brought her up this hill for a picnic. He had pointed at this same oak, and he had said, "This tree has a soul, Win. It knows who deserves to stand beneath it." She had laughed at him then. She had said trees do not have souls. He had smiled and said, "Some do." Now she stood beneath the oak, and she thought maybe he had been right. Win set down her bag at the base of the trunk. She put her hand on the bark. It was cold, rough, alive. She looked up again, at the cradle of branches, and the idea came all at once. Not slow, not gradual, all at once, like a match striking. Not a house on the ground, a house in the tree, because a house on the ground can be taken from you. A door can be shut. A key can be turned. A stepmother can throw you out. But a house in the sky, a house 30 feet above the mud, in the arms of a 300-year-old oak, no one could shut that door on her, because she would build the door. She was 19 years old. She had $6. She had never built anything larger than a sewing basket. She had no lumber, no tools, no help, but she had read books. She had watched the town carpenter for hours as a child. She had studied diagrams of ships and bridges and mills in her father's old volumes. She had her hands, she had her mind, and she had nowhere else to go. That was the strongest reason of all. Win picked up her bag. She walked back down the hill, not toward the livery, toward the general store. She had a plan now, and a girl with a plan walks differently than a girl without one. The bell above the door of Whitaker's general store jingled. When Win pushed it open, Elias Whitaker looked up from behind the counter. He was 58 years old, thin, stooped, flour dust on his spectacles. His wife had died 3 years back. He lived above the store, alone. He saw Win. He saw the mud on her dress. He saw her wet hair. He saw the way she held her bag like it was the only thing keeping her upright. He did not ask a single question. He just said, "Morning, Miss Merritt. Morning, Mr. Whitaker. What can I do for you today?" Win walked to the counter. She set down her $6.40 in a small neat pile. "I need a hammer," she said, "a handsaw, and a bag of nails, as many as this will buy." Elias looked at the money. He looked at her. He did not smile. He did not frown. He just nodded. "All right." He went to the back. He came out with a hammer. Not the cheapest one. A good one. Heavy head. Solid handle. He came out with a handsaw. Sharp. Almost new. He came out with a canvas bag of nails. Big enough to hold 3 pounds. He set them on the counter. Win looked at the pile. She looked at her money. She knew this was worth more than $6. "Mr. Whitaker. $6.40. Exactly. But $6.40. He looked at her, straight. His eyes were kind, but there was steel underneath. Win understood. She did not argue. She pushed the money across the counter. She gathered the tools into her arms. At the door she stopped. She turned around. "Mr. Whitaker." "Yes. Thank you." He nodded once, and then he said very quietly, "Your father was a good man, Miss Merritt. He fixed my roof for free the summer my wife was sick. I never got to pay him back." Win's throat closed. She could not speak. She just nodded, and walked out into the cold morning. Behind her, Elias Whitaker took off his spectacles, and wiped them very carefully on his apron. The first day, Win pulled boards off the old livery stable. The nails were rusted. The wood was gray, and soft on the outside, but sound underneath. She used the claw of her hammer to pry each board loose, one at a time, slow and careful, because she could not waste a single one. Her hands blistered within an hour. She kept going. By noon, the blisters had broken. Her palms were slick with blood and clear fluid. She wrapped them in strips torn from her spare petticoat and kept going. By evening, she had a pile of 30 boards. She sat down in the wet grass. She looked at the pile. 30 boards. She would need 300. She lay back in the grass and looked at the sky. It was almost dark. Her stomach was empty. Her hands were on fire. Her back was one long ache. But she had 30 boards. And tomorrow she would have 30 more. And the day after that 30 more. Because that is how you build a house. One board at a time. She slept that night at the base of the oak, wrapped in her thin shawl, her hammer beside her. Like a woman with a weapon. The second day was harder. Because on the second day, the town noticed. 2 ranch hands rode past the hill on their way to the north pasture. They saw Win dragging a board up the slope. They reined in their horses. They stared. Ain't that the Merritt girl? Reckon it is. What's she doing? Beats me. They watched her for a long minute. She did not look at them. She just kept dragging the board. One of them laughed. Building herself a nest, is she? The other one grinned. Merritt's girl up in her tree. They rode on. By supper, the whole saloon knew. By the next morning, the whole town knew. By the third day, the name had stuck. Win's Nest. They said it in the general store, in the church pews, behind cupped hands at the dressmakers, on the front porches at dusk. Some said it like a joke. Some said it like pity. Some said it like an insult. Nobody said it like they believed in her. Win heard the name for the first time on the 4th day. She was in the mercantile buying a small tin of lard. She had $1.10 left. She was rationing. 2 women were near the flour barrels. Older. Bonnet. Whispering. Not whispering quietly enough. Have you seen her? Up on the hill? I saw her yesterday, dragging boards like a mule. Poor thing. Poor nothing. She's gone simple. Grief will do that. Win's Nest, they're calling it. Fitting name. Win paid for her lard. She kept her face still. She walked out. She did not cry until she was halfway up the hill. And then she stopped, right there, in the middle of the wet grass, and she cried standing up. Fists clenched. Face wet. Chest shaking. She cried for maybe 3 minutes. Then she wiped her face on her sleeve. She picked up the next board. And she dragged it up the hill. Because tears do not build houses. Nails do. On the 5th day she met Odalie Bell. Odalie was 20. The blacksmith's daughter. Red hair. Sharp tongue. Prettiest girl in Blackwood Hollow. And she knew it. She rode up on a bay mare, straight up to the base of the oak, and looked down at Win with a grin that was not friendly. Well, she said, look at you. Win did not look up. She was measuring a board with a piece of charcoal. Building yourself a bird nest, Merritt? Win kept measuring. You know what everyone's calling it. Down in town. Win kept measuring. Odalie leaned forward on her saddle. Win's Nest. Cute, isn't it? You gonna lay eggs up there? Win made her mark. Then she looked up. She looked Odalie straight in the eye. Not angry. Not afraid. Just looked. Something you need, Odalie. No. Just came to see the show. There's no show. There sure is. Whole town's watching. Then whole town needs a hobby. Odalie's grin flickered. Just for a second. Then she laughed. Loud. Fake. She turned her horse. And she rode back down the hill, calling over her shoulder. Queen of the Splinter Castle. Long may she reign. Win watched her go. She did not smile. She did not frown. She picked up her saw. And she made the first cut. The wood sang under the blade. High. Clean. A sound like something new being born. The days blurred. Win learned things she did not know she could learn. She learned how to straighten a bent nail on a flat rock. She learned how to tie a bowline knot from a book on sailing she had read at age 12. She learned that the sound of a saw biting pine is different from the sound of a saw biting oak. Pine sings, Oak groans. Pine gives. Oak fights. She learned that when your hands blister, then bleed, then callous, they stop hurting. They just become tools. Same as the hammer. Same as the saw. Same as any other thing you use to build a life. She learned that a person can go a long time on very little food, if she has something to build. By the end of the first week, the platform was framed. Thick beams lashed, and nailed to the 3 main branches of the oak. 25 feet above the ground. Level. Solid. By the end of the second week, the floor was laid. By the end of the third week, 3 of the 4 walls were up. Wynne stood inside the half-finished shell of her house one evening, looking out through the open 4th wall at the sunset, over Blackwood Hollow. The whole valley spread out below her. The town looked small, toy-sized, like something she could hold in her palm. For the first time since her father died, she felt something that was not fear. She felt tall. That night, she opened her mother's book of poems. She had not opened it since the night she was thrown out. She had not been able to. It hurt too much. Her mother's handwriting was in the margins. Small notes. Underlines. Little stars beside favorite lines. Her mother's name had been Eloan. Eloan Merritt. She had died when Wynne was 9 years old. Consumption. Slow. Terrible. Wynne had been the one who held her hand at the end. Wynne opened the book carefully by candlelight. She flipped through the pages, and she found it, a folded piece of paper, tucked between 2 pages of the Book of Ruth. It had not been there before. Wynne knew every page of this book. She had read it 100 times as a girl. This paper was new, or not new, hidden by someone, waiting. She unfolded it slowly. Her hands were shaking. The handwriting was her mother's. My darling Wynne, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have found this book at a time when you needed it most. I want to tell you something I could not tell you when you were small. The hill behind our town. The one with the great oak. That land belonged to your grandmother, my mother. When she died, she left it to me. And when you were 3 years old, I filed the deed in your name at the courthouse in Larimer County. It is yours. It has always been yours. I did not tell your father. He did not know. I did not tell anyone, because someone tried once to take it from me. A man from a company. I do not know if he will come back. But if he does, my darling, you must know. The papers are in a tin box, under the small altar in the parlor. The one with your grandmother's cross on it. Lift the boards. The box is beneath. I love you more than the world. Mama. Wynne read it twice, then a third time. Her hands were not shaking anymore. She looked up, through the open 4th wall of her house. At the branches of the oak above her. At the stars beyond them. She was not a trespasser. She had never been a trespasser. She was standing on her own land, in her own tree, under her own sky. She had been coming home. She just did not know it until now. Wynne folded the letter. Very carefully. She tucked it back into the Book of Ruth. She closed the book. She held it against her chest. And for the first time in a long time she smiled. A small smile, in the dark, on a half-finished platform, 25 feet above the ground. But a smile. The next morning she made a decision. She would go back to the house. Not to stay, not to beg, not to see Coralie, to get the tin box. Because everything her mother had left her, the land, the deed, whatever else was in that box, belonged to her. And she was going to get it back. She waited until night. She waited until she saw, from her high perch on the hill, the single lamp go out in the front room of the Merritt house. Then she climbed down her rope, and she walked into town, quiet, careful, in the shadow of the buildings, past the sleeping saloon, past the dark church, to the back of her father's house. The kitchen window was never locked. She lifted it, slid inside. Her boots did not make a sound on the wooden floor. She moved through the dark kitchen, into the hallway, into the parlor. And there, against the far wall, was the small altar, her grandmother's cross on top, just as her mother had said. Wynne knelt down. She felt along the base. Her fingers found the seam. A small board. Loose. She pried it up with her knife. Underneath the tin box. She lifted it out. She held it in her hands. It was heavier than she expected. And that was when she heard the voices. 2 voices. Low. Coming from the front room. Just on the other side of the parlor door. One was Coralie. The other was a man. A man's voice she did not know. Deep, cold, slow. The kind of voice that has never once had to raise itself, because it has never once been disobeyed. Wynne froze. She held the tin box against her chest. She did not breathe. She listened, and what she heard in the next 90 seconds was going to change everything. The man's voice came again. Slow, cold, like something crawling under a door. You said this would be finished by now, Mrs. Merritt. I know what I said. I don't like hearing myself repeated back to me. I know that too. A pause. Then the sound of a boot heel, turning on the floorboard. Once. Slow. The rail company does not wait, Mrs. Merritt. The rail company does not extend courtesies. The rail company purchases land. Cleanly, legally, or it does not purchase at all. I understand. Then explain to me why your stepdaughter is still standing on the very hill I intend to buy. Wynne's breath caught. She pressed her back against the parlor wall. The tin box pressed against her ribs. She did not move. Coralie's voice came next. Different now. Not sharp. Not cold. Something else. Something Wynne had never heard from her before. Something like fear. She'll come down. She has no food. No money. Winter is coming. Winter is a slow gun, Mrs. Merritt. I need a fast one. What do you want me to do? Speak to the sheriff. I have. Speak to him again. Louder this time. Silence. Then the man again. Softer now. Which was worse. Mrs. Merritt. I do not like reminding a lady of things she wishes to forget. Coralie made a small sound. Not a word. Just a sound. But we both know, the man said. There is a letter. In a safe. In Denver. And in that letter is a name. And a date. And a place. A certain foundling home in St. Louis. A certain young woman who arrived there in the spring of 1863. Alone. And left 3 days later. Alone. Coralie did not speak. I have kept that letter for 3 years, Mrs. Merritt. I have kept it because you and I had an agreement. That agreement was that when the rail line came through Blackwood Hollow, you would ensure a certain hill was ready to be sold. Clean of title. Clean of complication. She is a complication I did not know about. That is not my problem. Another silence. Then Coralie, quiet. Give me 2 more weeks. You have one. The sound of a chair pushed back. The sound of boots. Walking toward the front door. Then the voice again. At the door now. Almost casual. And Mrs. Merritt. Yes. Do not misunderstand my patience for weakness. I have buried men in the Rockies for less than what you are testing. The front door opened. The front door closed. Silence. Then, from the front room, the sound of Coralie sitting down. Hard. In her chair. And crying. Not loud. Not dramatic. The kind of crying a woman does when she has been holding it in for years. Wynne stood in the dark parlor. Frozen. The tin box against her chest. Her mother's letter in her pocket. Her stepmother weeping in the next room. She did not know what to feel. She knew what to do. Move. Now. Before Coralie stood up. Before she came into the parlor. Before she saw. Wynne crossed the parlor on the balls of her feet. Into the hall. Into the kitchen. Out the window. Down onto the wet grass. She did not run. She walked. Slow. Steady. Around the side of the house. Down the alley. Past the church. Up the road. Up the hill. Up to her tree. She climbed the rope. She pulled it up behind her. She sat down on the platform. And only then, did she let herself breathe. Wynne opened the tin box by candlelight. Her hands were steady now. They had a job. Inside the box. 3 folded documents. A photograph. A silver locket on a broken chain. and a small envelope sealed with red wax. She unfolded the first document. Deed of land. Parcel 14 North. Blackwood Township, Larimer County, Colorado. Filed May 3, 1869. Recorded to Win Eloan Merritt, minor, under guardianship of Eloan May Merritt. Win read it 3 times. It was real. It was signed. It was stamped. It was hers. She unfolded the second document. A letter from a lawyer in Fort Collins, dated the same month, confirming the filing, confirming that any dispute or claim on the land would need to be brought in Larimer County Court. Not Blackwood Hollow, Larimer County, which meant Sheriff Cobb had no jurisdiction. None. 0. Wynne almost laughed. She unfolded the third document. A will. Her mother's will. Naming her, Wynne, as sole heir to the land, the deed, and any and all rights attached to it. Signed. Witnessed. Notarized. Wynne set the papers down. She picked up the photograph. It was old. Faded around the edges. 2 young women in Sunday dresses. One was her mother, young, maybe 20, before the sickness took her cheeks. The other Wynne did not recognize. Also young. Also smiling. An arm around Eloan's shoulders. On the back of the photograph, in her mother's handwriting, Eloan and Mercy. Larimer County Fair. 1867. Mercy. Wynne stared at the name. Then she picked up the locket. Broken chain. Silver. Small. She pried it open. Inside, a curl of red hair. Red hair. Wynne sat very still. She thought of Odalie Bell. Red hair. 20 years old. Blacksmith's daughter. Mother had died 2 years ago. Mother's name had been Wynne could not remember. But she knew someone who would. Wynne slept 2 hours. Maybe. She woke before dawn. The sky above the oak was a bruise of blue-black. Somewhere down in the valley, a rooster tried once and gave up. She climbed down. She walked into town before the shops opened. She went to the back of Whitaker's General Store. She knocked on the small door beside the delivery entrance. Twice. Soft. Elias opened it. In a nightshirt and suspenders. Hair sticking up. He blinked at her. Miss Merritt. Mr. Whitaker. I'm sorry. You're not sorry. What do you need? Wynne took a breath. I need to know the name of Odalie Bell's mother. Elias frowned. Rubbed his jaw. Odalie Bell. Blacksmith's girl. Yes. Her mother passed. Winter of 83. I know. What was her name? He thought. Mercy. Wynne closed her eyes. Mercy Bell. Mercy Bell, yes. Married Ephraim Bell in, I don't remember, late 60s. She was a good woman. Read every book that came through my store. Wynne opened her eyes. Mr. Whitaker. Was my mother her friend? Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quiet. They were closer than sisters, Miss Merritt. Your mother and Mercy Bell. Before you were born. Before Odalie was born. They grew up together. Right here in this town. Wynne nodded slowly. She said thank you. She turned to leave. Elias caught her sleeve. Just for a second. Miss Merritt. Yes. Whatever it is you're doing. On that hill. Whatever you're building. He paused. He searched for the words. He was not a man who used many. Your mother would be proud. Wynne could not speak. She walked away. And she did not let herself cry until she was halfway up the hill. Sheriff Cobb came that afternoon. She heard the horse first, then saw him, dust rising off the road, sun on his badge, one hand on his hip like a man playing a part. He reined in at the base of the oak. He did not dismount. He looked up. Wynne was on the platform, nailing the last board of the fourth wall. She did not stop hammering. Miss Merritt. Bang. Miss Merritt. I am talking to you. Bang. 7 days. Wynne set the hammer down. She wiped her forehead on her sleeve. She walked to the edge of the platform. She looked down at him. 7 days for what, Sheriff? For this to come down. On whose authority? Cobb's jaw twitched. On the town's authority. The town does not own this land. Excuse me? The town does not. This land. Cobb laughed. A short, ugly laugh. Little girl. This is town commons. Has been for 30 years. No, sir. It has not. You want to argue land law with me. I don't want to argue anything. I want you to check the records. In Larimer County, where this deed was filed. In 1869. In my name. Cobb went still. Very still. For one full second. Then he smiled. And Wynne saw, clear as glass, that he already knew. He already knew about the deed. He already knew this land was hers. He was here anyway, which meant somebody was paying him to be here anyway. Miss Merritt, he said, slow and soft, papers can be lost. Papers can be misfiled. Papers can burn. You understand what I'm telling you? I understand exactly what you're telling me, Sheriff. 7 days. He turned his horse. He rode off. Wynne watched him go. Then she went back to hammering. But her hands were shaking now, because papers could burn. That night, Odalie Bell came up the hill. Alone. On foot. In the dark. Carrying a lantern. Wynne saw the light coming up the slope. She reached for her hammer. Because a person coming up a hill in the dark, with a lantern, is not always a friend. Then she saw the red hair. She lowered the hammer. Odalie stopped at the base of the tree. She looked up. Merritt. Bell. Come down. I need to talk to you. Come up. I'm not climbing that rope. Then talk from down there. Odalie exhaled hard through her nose. She set down the lantern. She looked at the rope. She looked at Wynne. She grabbed the rope. She climbed. Slow. Cursing under her breath the whole way. When she got to the platform, she rolled onto it like a fish onto a deck, breathing hard. How do you do this every day? You get used to it. I hate you. Wynne almost smiled. Odalie sat up. Her red hair had come loose from its pins. She pushed it back. She looked around the half-finished house. The walls. The window frame Wynne had cut yesterday. The floor. The rope and pulley system by the door. Her face changed. Wynne watched it change. She saw the mockery leave. She saw the joke leave. She saw something else move in. Something Wynne could not name at first. Then she saw it. Respect. You built this, Odalie said. Yes. All of it. By yourself. So far. 19 years old. And you built this. Yes. Odalie looked at her hands. Then at Wynne's hands. She looked at the calluses. The old blisters. The nails cut short and rough. She swallowed. Merritt, I came up here to say something. And I'm going to say it. Because if I don't say it now, I won't say it. And if I don't say it, I'll go home and hate myself. So. She took a breath. I've been cruel to you. Wynne did not answer. Since we were 12 years old. I've been cruel. I called you names. I laughed at you. I told other girls not to sit next to you at church. I made a game of it. I remember. I know you do. And I'm not asking you to forgive me for it. That would be a lot. Too much. I'm just... She stopped. She started again. My mother died 2 years ago. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Listen. Before she died, 3 weeks before, she called me to her bed. She was very small by then, and she took my hand, and she said, Odalie, you listen to me now. There is a girl in this town, whose mother was my sister in every way that matters. Her mother's name was Eloan Merritt, and the girl's name is Wynne. And someday, Odalie, someday that girl is going to need somebody to stand beside her. And when that day comes, you are going to be the one who stands. Wynne did not move. She made me promise, Merritt. I promised her. And then for 2 years I did nothing. I let you get thrown out of your own house. I let this whole town laugh at you. I laughed at you. I called this place. Odalie gestured at the walls. I called it Wynne's Nest. In front of everyone. Like it was funny. Like you were funny. Her voice cracked. And then last night I was at my aunt's. And she said Sheriff Cobb came by the smithy. To talk to my daddy. And a man was with him. A tall man. In a black coat. From Denver. And they were asking about you. Wynne's stomach dropped. They were asking, Odalie said. if any of the Bell family had ever seen paperwork on this hill, because they wanted to make sure no paperwork existed. Wynne closed her eyes. She saw Cobb's face this afternoon. Papers can burn. Odalie was still talking. My daddy told them he'd never seen anything. He hadn't. He didn't know. But She stopped. I knew about your mother and mine. I knew they were close. I knew there was a picture. I don't know what's true, Wynne. I don't know what this is. But I know, when a man in a black coat rides all the way, from Denver to a smithy in Blackwood Hollow to ask about paperwork on a hill, her eyes met Wynne's. Then something is wrong, and I made a promise to my mother. And I am late, but I am here. Wynne stared at her. She reached into her coat pocket. She took out the photograph. She handed it to Odalie. Odalie held it up to the lantern. She looked at it for a long time, and then very slowly, very quietly, she started to cry. Not loud, not shaking, just tears, running down her face. That's my mother, she whispered. Yes. She's so young. Yes. They look like sisters. Yes. Odalie touched her mother's face with one fingertip. I'm going to help you, Wynne. Whatever this is. I don't care what my daddy says. I don't care what the town says. I made a promise, and I'm going to keep it. Wynne took her hand. She did not say anything. She did not need to. By the next afternoon, there were 4 of them. Odalie had gone straight down the hill, that morning, to the seamstress's shop. She had walked in without knocking, and she had said, loud enough for the whole shop to hear, Prudence Vale, are you my friend, or are you a coward? Prudence Vale was 17, small, quiet. She had 2 long dark braids, and hands that could stitch faster than any woman in the county. She had been Odalie's friend since they were 6. She had looked up from her sewing. She had said, both probably. I need you up on that hill. When? Now. Prudence had put down her needle, taken off her apron, followed Odalie out the door. She had not asked why. Then Odalie had gone to the schoolteacher's cottage. The schoolteacher had a daughter, 22 years old, bookish, long-boned, awkward, name of Cordelia Marsh. She had been reading a novel on the front porch when Odalie walked up. Odalie had said, Cordelia, do you know what's happening on that hill? I've heard things. The things you've heard are wrong. I suspected they might be. Then get up. Come with me. Cordelia had put down her book. She had gotten up. She had come. And now there were 4 of them. 4 young women on the platform of Wynne's Nest. 4 sets of hands. 4 sets of eyes. 4 voices. Prudence Vale took one look at the rope hoist Wynne had built and said, I can improve this. Give me 2 hours. Cordelia Marsh took one look at the wall seams and said, I have my father's carpentry book at home. I'll bring it tomorrow. Odalie Bell took the hammer out of Wynne's hand, and she said, You've been swinging this thing for a month. Sit down. Eat something. I'll do this row. Wynne sat down. She watched them work. She did not know what to do with the feeling in her chest. She had built this place alone. It had been hers alone. Every board, every nail, every splinter. She had thought, she had believed that alone was safer. But watching Odalie swing that hammer, watching Prudence retie a rope, watching Cordelia measure a beam with a piece of charcoal, Wynne realized she had been wrong. Alone was not safer. Alone was just alone. Elias Whitaker came up the hill that evening. He brought a wagon. He brought his mule. And in the wagon 2 panes of real glass, wrapped in straw, just big enough for a window. He did not explain them. He just unloaded them, set them at the base of the tree, nodded to the 4 young women on the platform above. Turned to leave. Wynne called down from the platform, Mr. Whitaker. Miss Merritt. Why? He looked up at her. For a long moment. Then he said, Because your father would have. He got in the wagon. He drove away. That was when Coralie came up the hill. Not at night. Not in secret. In the middle of the day. In her Sunday dress. With her chin up. With half the town watching from the road below. She climbed the slope in her good boots. She was breathing hard by the time she reached the top. She stopped at the base of the oak. She looked up at the house. For young women looked back down. Wynne climbed down the rope. She stood in front of Coralie, 19 years old, dirty, calloused, hair tied back with a scrap of rag, a hammer in her belt like a pistol. Coralie looked her up and down. Come home, Wynne. No. You've made your point. Everyone has seen. Come home. This is my home. Don't be ridiculous. That is a tree. It is my tree, on my land. Coralie's face changed, just for a heartbeat. She had not expected that word. Wynne, come down. Let us stop this. Wynne reached into her coat pocket. She took out the deed, folded, cream-colored, stamped in one corner. She held it up, not close enough for Coralie to grab, just close enough to read. Coralie read it. Her face went white. The color drained from her mouth first, then her cheeks, then her forehead. Wynne had never seen it happen so fast. Like a candle blown out. Where? Coralie said. Under the altar, where she left it. You went into my house. I went into my father's house, to get what my mother left me, in the room where she used to pray, under the altar she made with her own hands, where you never once knelt. Coralie's mouth opened, and closed. She was not going to win this, not standing here, not in her Sunday dress, not with 4 young women watching from a platform in the sky, not with a deed in her stepdaughter's hand. So she did what people do when they cannot win. She turned it into a threat. You think a piece of paper protects you. I know it does. You think this town will side with you. I don't need this town. You think. Coralie stopped herself. She took a breath. She lowered her voice. And she said very quietly, so only Wynne could hear, there are men, Wynne, in Denver, who will burn that paper, and this tree, and you, and when they are done, there will be nothing to say you were ever here. Wynne looked at her, for a long time, and then Wynne said, quiet, steady, without heat, Coralie, I know about the letter. Coralie went absolutely still. Wynne watched her die a small death right there on the hillside. In her Sunday dress, in front of her stepdaughter, in front of God. I know, Wynne said, about St. Louis, about the foundling home, about the spring of 1863. Coralie's hand went to her throat. Wynne did not stop. I heard him, in the parlor, 2 nights ago. I was in the next room. He said your name. He said your name, Coralie, and he said what he had, and I heard everything. Coralie was not breathing. Wynne softened her voice, just slightly. I am not going to tell anyone, not the town, not the church, not one soul. Coralie looked up. But you are going to go home, Coralie, and you are going to tell that man in Denver that this land is not for sale. It has never been for sale. It will never be for sale. And if he tries to burn one board of this house, one board, I will tell every last thing I heard. To Larimer County, to Denver, to every newspaper north of Pueblo. Wynne took a step closer. And I want you to hear me now, because I will only say this once. Coralie stood there, waiting. You threw me out of my father's house, in the rain, on the coldest night of the fall, with nothing, because I was too clever. Wynne, I am not finished. Coralie closed her mouth. You did that, and I have thought about you every day since. And I have been angry every day since. And I have wanted at least once for you to be as afraid as I was that night. Wynne paused. Well, look at yourself, Coralie. Look at your hands. Look at your face. That is what afraid looks like. Coralie was shaking. Wynne stepped back. Go home, and do not come up this hill again. Coralie stood there, for maybe 5 seconds. Then she turned, and she walked down the hill. Not fast. She could not walk fast. Her legs were not steady. Wynne watched her all the way to the road. Then she turned around, and looked up at the platform. Odalie was leaning over the edge, wide-eyed. Prudence had a hand over her mouth. Cordelia was very slowly setting down her hammer. Odalie called down, in a voice half whisper, half holler, "Win Merritt, what in the sweet name of heaven was that?" Win started up the rope. She did not answer. She did not have to. That night the rain started again. Not hard at first. Just steady. Just soft. The kind of rain that means to stay. Win stood at the window her friends had helped her frame that afternoon. Elias's real glass fit inside it. She could see out over the whole valley. The lights of the town. The dark ribbon of Blackwood Creek. The pale line of the road going west. Behind her, Odalie was banking the small stove Prudence had brought up. Prudence was writing in a notebook by candlelight. Cordelia had gone home to fetch her father's carpentry book, but Odalie had already announced she was staying the night. "You are not sleeping up here alone one more day, Win Merritt. I forbid it." Win had let her stay. She watched the rain come down. Somewhere in the back of her mind, like a bell rung a long way off, she remembered something. A book, on her father's shelf. Cloth-bound, blue. Geological Surveys of the Colorado Territory, 1876. She had read it as a girl, because she read everything, because she had nothing else to do on winter afternoons. There had been a chapter on the earthworks of the Blackwood Basin, the dam, the one built upstream in '78 to hold back the spring melt for the ranches south of the mountain. She remembered, a passage her father had underlined, in pencil, in his careful, sloping hand. This impoundment was constructed of packed earth, without adequate stone reinforcement. Any sustained precipitation event exceeding 7 days' duration will place the dam at severe risk of failure. Her father had written in the margin, told the council. 3 times. No response. T.M. Win stared out the window. The rain came down. She counted back. The rain had started on Monday last, then stopped Tuesday, then started again on Thursday, then stopped Friday, then started again yesterday, and then again today. Today was the 5th day of rain out of the last 8. If it kept up tomorrow, and the day after, that would be 7 days. Win turned from the window. Odalie, how long has it been raining? In the valley, this month. Odalie thought. Feels like all month. But actually, I don't know. 8 days? 10? Win looked at Prudence. Prudence, do you remember? Prudence looked up from her notebook. I keep a weather log, for the seamstress, because damp changes fabric. When did the rain start? Prudence flipped back 3 pages. 2. 1. October 14th. First heavy rain. Then again on the 16th. 19th, 21st through today. Today is the 23rd. Win did the math. She did it twice. She sat down. Win, Odalie said. What is it? Win, your face. Win looked up. She looked at her friends. She said very quietly, I need to go down to town. Right now. In the rain. Right now. Odalie stood up. Then I'm coming with you. Win shook her head. Not this time. I need you to stay here. I need you to start moving everything up. Food, water, blankets, every rope we have, everything. Why? Win walked to the door. She looked back over her shoulder. Because if I'm right, this whole town is going to be underwater by morning. She opened the door. And she climbed down into the rain. Win ran. Down the hill. Through wet grass. Through mud that grabbed at her boots. The rain hit her face sideways. Her hair came loose. She did not stop. She ran through the alley behind the church. Past the dark general store. Past the closed dressmakers. Straight to the saloon. Because that was where Sheriff Cobb would be. On a Friday night. In the rain. Every Friday. Every night. She pushed the door open. The warmth hit her first. Then the smoke. Then the noise. 20 men turned their heads. A girl, 19, soaking wet, wild-haired, in a saloon. At night, the piano stopped. Somebody laughed. Win did not care. She spotted Cobb at the corner table, playing cards, whiskey in front of him. She walked straight to him. She put both her hands flat on his table. Sheriff. Well, Cobb leaned back. Look who came down from her tree. The dam. What? The upstream dam. It is going to fail. Cobb blinked at her. Then he laughed. Not a small laugh. Full, wet, belly laugh. The kind of laugh a man does when he wants everyone else to laugh too. They did. The whole saloon laughed. The dam is going to fail, Cobb repeated. The dam is going to fail. Boys, did you hear? The girl in the tree says the sky is falling. More laughter. Wynne did not move her hands from the table. Sheriff, listen to me. There is a survey from 1876. It says the dam cannot hold 7 straight days of rain. This is day 5. Tomorrow is day 6. If it does not stop tonight, Miss Merritt, you need to ring the church bell. You need to move people to high ground. Tonight. Miss Merritt. Now. Cobb stopped smiling. He leaned forward. He picked up his whiskey. He drank it. Slow. He set the glass down. And he said, quiet enough that only the men closest could hear, go back to your tree, little girl, before I throw you back into it. Wynne stood there. For one long second, she looked at every face in that saloon. She saw the smirks. She saw the pity. She saw a very few, men who looked uncomfortable, who dropped their eyes. Not one of them stood up. Not one. Wynne straightened. She wiped the rain out of her eyes with the back of her wrist. She said, loud enough for the whole room, when your children are drowning tomorrow, remember I told you tonight. She turned. She walked out. The saloon door swung shut behind her. Behind her, for one instant, she thought she heard silence. Real silence. The kind that comes when people know in the deepest part of themselves that they have just done something they cannot take back. Then the piano started up again, and the laughter followed her out into the rain. She ran to Elias Whitaker's. She pounded on his door until he opened it. He took one look at her face. He said, how long do we have? I don't know. Maybe hours. Maybe a day. Tell me what you need. Rope. All of it. Lamp oil. Blankets. Every jar of anything you have. As much salt pork and hardtack as your wagon will hold. And Mr. Whitaker. Yes. Get your neighbors. Get anyone who will listen. Tell them to move uphill. Tonight. Elias nodded once. He went into the back. He came out 3 minutes later with 2 large canvas sacks. He shoved them into her arms. Take these now. Go. I will bring the rest by wagon. Up your hill. Mr. Whitaker. Go, child. Go. She went. She dragged the sacks up the hill through the mud. Halfway up, Odalie met her. Then Prudence. They took the sacks from her without a word. Cordelia was already at the platform, with her father's carpentry book and a lantern. She had brought her father. He was 64 years old, a schoolteacher. He had never built anything in his life, but he had come. He was already tying knots on the pulley system, following Prudence's instructions in the pouring rain. When climbed the rope one more time, she stood on the platform and looked out over Blackwood Hollow. Down in town, one light had gone on in a house near the creek. Someone was awake. Someone had heard something, or seen the wagon of Elias Whitaker moving in the rain. But most of the town was dark. Most of the town was sleeping. Most of the town had not listened. Wynne turned back to her friends. Get everything up. Now. All of it. Fast as you can. They worked. The night was long. They hauled up 3 sacks of hardtack, a wheel of cheese, a ham, 2 barrels of drinking water, 6 wool blankets, 2 coils of rope, a hatchet, a lantern, Elias's canvas sacks, and after Elias himself came puffing up the hill at 1:30 in the morning, a leather satchel of medical bandages, a bottle of laudanum, and a small tin of coffee. They sealed the roof seams one more time with pine tar. They reinforced the 2 weakest platform anchors with new lashings. They ate standing up. Nobody sat down. 3 in the morning, the rain slowed. Just for a moment. Wynne stepped to the window. She looked out into the dark. The clouds broke. Just enough for the moon to come through. Just enough for her to see. The creek was over its banks. Not by much. Not yet. But it was moving fast. And in the moonlight the water looked wrong. Not brown. Not gray. A deep churning yellow. Like clay. Like the belly of a snake. Wynne knew what that color meant. The dam was already starting to give. The clay of the earthworks was breaking loose upstream. Somewhere. It had begun. Odily. Yeah. Wake everyone. Get them to the wall. Tell your father to sit against the trunk. Tell Cordelia's father to sit next to him. Wynne. Now Odily. Odily moved. Wynne stayed at the window. She could hear it now. Not just the rain on the roof. Not just the wind in the branches. Something else. A sound like a train that was still a mile away. A sound like the ground remembering something. A low, deep, rolling growl. Wynne closed her eyes. Please, she thought. Please, Papa. Please, Mama. Please let me be wrong. She opened her eyes. She was not wrong. The dam broke at 3:47 in the morning. The sound came first. A crack. Then a roar. Then a sound that was not a sound at all. A sound that was pressure. A sound that was weight. A sound that pushed against the walls of the treehouse and made the boards tremble. Then the water came. Wynne saw it from her window. A wall of it. 6 feet high. Then 8. Then higher. Moving down the valley faster than a horse could run. Carrying trees. Carrying fences. Carrying the roof of the old tannery. Carrying a wagon. Carrying God, carrying a house. The house rolled. Slow. End over end. Like a child's toy. It hit the schoolhouse. The schoolhouse folded in on itself. Both went under. The lights in the town came on. All at once. Every window. As if the whole town had woken up in the same second. Then the water hit them. Wynne watched. She could not look away. She would not look away. She saw the church go under. She saw the general store fold. She saw the saloon, that same saloon, where she had stood 12 hours ago, lift off its foundation and float sideways and break apart against the schoolhouse ruin. She saw people on rooftops, small figures in the dark, waving lanterns, screaming. She could not hear them over the roar, but she saw them. Odily was beside her now, gripping the windowsill, white as chalk. Oh God, Wynne. Yes. Oh God, oh God, oh God. Wynne took her hand. Odily, look at me. Odily looked. We are going to help them. As many as we can reach. Do you understand? Odily nodded. Get the long rope. The one Elias brought up. Bring it here. Now. Odily moved. The water rose fast. By 4:30 the town was gone. Not damaged. Not flooded. Gone. There was no town anymore. There was a lake. A wide, churning, brown lake full of debris. Full of pieces of houses. Full of drowned livestock. Full of things Wynne would not name. The only things above water. The church steeple, sticking up like a finger. The very top of the schoolhouse bell tower. The upstairs windows of 1 or 2 houses on the higher end of Main Street. And the small hill where the church cemetery sat, now an island. Barely. 15 or 20 people had made it to that island. They were huddled together on the highest gravestones. They were waving. They were shouting. Wynne could hear them now, small and thin and ragged across the water. Help! Help US! The tree! Look at the tree! They had seen her. They had seen the house. Sheriff Cobb was among them. She could see the shine of his badge in the moonlight. His uniform coat was gone. His hat was gone. He was standing in 6 inches of water on top of a gravestone. He cupped his hands around his mouth. Miss Merritt! Wynne stood at the window. Behind her, Odily held the rope. Wynne did not answer for a full second. She thought just for a second about all the people on that island. Cobb, who had laughed at her in the saloon 12 hours ago. And she thought just for a second about not answering. But only for a second. Because that was not who she was. Because her father had raised her better than that. Because her mother had raised her better than that. Because her house had not been built to sit above a graveyard. Wynne cupped her hands around her mouth. I hear you. Can you help us? I have a rope. The water's too strong to swim. I know. Wynne turned to Odalie. Tell your father, and Cordelia's father to brace on the trunk side. Tell Prudence and Cordelia to help me feed rope. We are going to make a line across. How? We are going to throw them the end, and they are going to tie it, and they are going to come across hand over hand, one at a time. That current will kill them. Then they will die trying. But if they stay on that island, they die for sure. Odalie stared at her. Then she nodded, and she went. Wynne tied one end of the rope to the thickest branch above the platform. She braided the last 20 feet with a second, smaller rope for weight. She stood at the edge of the platform. She judged the distance. 60 feet across open water. Maybe 70. She had one throw. Maybe two. She swung the rope. Once, twice, 3 times. Building momentum. She threw. The rope arced through the wind. Fell short. Landed in the water. She dragged it back. Fast, hand over hand, arms burning. She threw again. Short again. But closer. The people on the island had found a long church pew. They pushed it out into the water, edge first like a spear. Cobb and 2 other men waded in behind it. Waist deep, then chest deep, fighting the current. Wynne threw a 3rd time. The rope landed across the pew. A cheer went up. A ragged, breaking cheer from the little island. Cobb grabbed the rope. He tied it to the pew. 2 other men held it. They dragged the whole rope and pew assembly back toward the island. And they tied the other end to the biggest gravestone. Now, 30 feet above the water, Wynne had a lifeline stretched across the flood. She looked at Odalie. Odalie looked at her. Wynne said, Start pulling. Slow. Steady. One at a time. The first person to make it across was an old woman named Mabel Alcott. She was 72 years old. Widowed. Half-deaf. She had lived in Blackwood Hollow for 47 years, and had never once said a word to Wynne Merritt. Cobb tied her to the rope himself. Around her waist. Under her arms. He kissed her forehead once. Wynne saw it even from 30 feet away. Then he let her go. Mabel came across hand over hand. Very slow. The current pulled her sideways. She screamed once, when a piece of debris hit her leg. She kept coming. When she got to the platform, Wynne and Odalie pulled her up. She was blue with cold. She was shaking so hard her teeth clacked. Prudence wrapped her in 3 blankets at once. Cordelia's father held her against his chest. Cordelia herself made her drink whiskey out of the tin cup, one slow swallow at a time. Mabel Alcott looked up at Wynne. Her old eyes were wet. She could barely speak. She said, It's you. It's me. You told them. In the saloon. My grandson was there. He told me. He said, a girl came in from the rain and told them the dam would break, and they laughed. Wynne did not answer. Mabel took her hand. Her old, thin, cold hand. He is on that island. My grandson. Please, child. I know. I see him. His name is Peter. I'll bring him next, Mabel. I swear it. They came across one at a time. Peter Alcott, 17 years old. His face gray. He fell to his knees on the platform and threw up seawater and did not stop shaking for an hour. Then Prudence's cousin, a man named Ellis, with a broken arm, from where a beam had hit him. Then a mother with a baby. The baby was wrapped in her shawl. The mother had tied the shawl to her own body, with strips of her dress, so she could not lose the child. When she got to the platform, she would not let anyone take the baby, not even Odalie. She just sat down and held her child, and cried without any sound at all. Then Cyrus Thorne. He had waited until the middle of the line. He was not old. He was not weak. He was not injured. He was 40 years old, tall, healthy, black-coated, and he pushed his way past a 15-year-old girl and a limping farmhand and tied himself to the rope while Sheriff Cobb was looking the other way. Wynne saw it. She was looking through her window, watching the line, counting the people left on the island, trying to guess how much time they had before the island itself went under. She saw Cyrus Thorne shove the young farmhand aside. She saw him take the rope. She recognized him instantly, even from 30 feet across the water. Because she had never seen his face, she had only heard his voice. But she knew, in her bones, the way a man moves, when he has never once feared anything in his own life. Cyrus Thorne started across the rope. Wynne turned to Odalie. "Stop pulling." "What?" "Stop pulling. Don't feed him rope." "Wynne, he's over the water. He'll fall." "I know." Wynne stepped to the window. She cupped her hands and shouted across the water. Loud, clear, sharp enough to cut through the rain. "Mr. Thorne." Cyrus Thorne, halfway across the flood, hanging from a rope, 30 feet above churning water, froze. He turned his head. He looked at the tree. He saw her. He saw a 19-year-old girl in a window, standing very still, looking at him. Wynne shouted again. "Mr. Thorne, you are going to stop right there." He shouted back, ragged, furious. "Pull me in, girl." "No, sir. Pull me in. There is a farmhand behind you. There is a woman with a hurt leg behind him. There is a boy of 12 behind her. You are going to hold that rope until each of them has crossed. And then, Mr. Thorne, I will pull you in. You cannot leave me here. I am not leaving you. I am asking you to wait your turn. If I fall, then hold on tighter." Cyrus Thorne stared at her. She stared back. The rain came down between them. The water roared beneath him. And when Merritt, 19 years old, holding a rope, standing in a house she had built, with her own hands, did not blink. Sheriff Cobb saw what was happening. From the island, he shouted across the water. "Miss Merritt." "Yes, Sheriff. You do what you have to do. You hear me? You do what you have to do." The old sheriff, up to his knees in floodwater, said the words like a man taking off his badge, before God took it off for him. Wynne nodded. She turned back to Odalie. "Now, bring the farmhand next. Around him. Send the extra rope. He can climb around Thorne if he has to." Odalie stared at her. Then she smiled. A grim, wild, breathless smile. "Yes, ma'am." They brought the farmhand across, around Cyrus Thorne, who cursed, who threatened, who invoked the names of railroad men and Denver bankers and a judge in Fort Collins. Wynne did not answer him, not once. They brought the woman with the hurt leg, then her 12-year-old boy, then two more. Then two more. Cyrus Thorne hung on the rope for 41 minutes. His arms shook. His face went white. His fine black coat came apart at the shoulders. At one point he screamed at Wynne, screamed her name, screamed things Wynne would not repeat to any living soul. She did not answer. She waited. When every other person on the island had crossed, every last one, down to the 12-year-old, and the woman with the hurt leg and the very last man who was Sheriff Cobb himself, Wynne finally called across the water. "Mr. Thorne." "Yes. You may come across now." He came, slow, exhausted, half-broken, his fine hands raw from the rope. He reached the platform. Wynne and Odalie and Prudence hauled him up. He collapsed onto the boards. Wynne knelt beside him. She said quiet so only he could hear, "You will live, Mr. Thorne. You will live because I chose that you would. Remember it." He looked up at her. For the first time in his life, Cyrus Thorne of the Colorado and Northern Rail Company had nothing to say. The last person across was Coralie Merritt. Wynne did not know she was on the island until she saw her, small, soaked, kneeling on the last dry gravestone. Her Sunday dress was gone. She was in a plain cotton shift. Her hair was down. She looked 20 years older than she had that afternoon on the hill. Cobb tied her to the rope. Coralie put her hands on the rope. She looked up, across the water, at the tree. Her eyes found Wynne's window. They looked at each other, stepdaughter and stepmother. across 60 feet of raging flood. Wynne stood very still. There was 1 second. Wynne would remember that 1 second for the rest of her life. 1 second where she saw, clear as a photograph, the shape of a different choice. Where she did not send the rope. Where she turned her back on the window. Where she let the water take Coralie the way Coralie had let the rain take her. 1 second. Then she was moving. Odalie, pull. Wynne, pull. Odalie pulled. Coralie came across hand over hand. Slow. Slower than any of the others. She was weak. She had been sick with terror for hours. Twice she almost let go. Twice Wynne shouted from the window, "Hold on. Hold on." And twice Coralie held on. When she reached the platform, she could not climb up. Wynne and Prudence had to lift her by the arms. She fell onto the boards on her hands and knees. She was crying. She was not asking for forgiveness. She was not saying she was sorry. She was just crying. The way a person cries when they have spent 40 years not crying, and it has all finally caught up. Wynne knelt beside her. She did not touch her. Not yet. She said, "Coralie, look at me." Coralie looked up. Her face was streaked. Her eyes were red. Wynne handed her a dry blanket. That was all. She stood up. She went back to the window, to watch for anyone else. There was no one else. The island was under. The town was under. The rain was still coming down. But every single person on that little gravestone island was now on Wynne Merritt's platform. 9 survivors. In a house built by a 19-year-old girl who had been thrown out into the rain. The rain stopped at dawn. Not slowly, all at once, as if someone somewhere had finally turned off a faucet. Wynne stepped out onto her platform. The sun was rising. The valley below was a lake of yellow-brown water. Nothing recognizable. No streets, no fences, only water and pieces of things, and the very tip of the church steeple far in the distance like the mast of a sunken ship. Behind her, 9 people slept, or tried to. Sheriff Cobb had not moved for 2 hours. Cyrus Thorne was tied to the trunk, with a length of rope, unconscious. Coralie sat with her back against the wall, holding the baby now, so the baby's mother could sleep. Wynne watched the sun rise over the water. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel proud. She felt only tired, and older than she had been at supper the night before. Odalie came out of the door and stood beside her. They did not speak for a while. Then Odalie said, "How did you know? About the dam? About all of it?" Wynne shook her head. "I didn't know. I just looked. My father wrote a note in a book. My mother wrote a note in another book. I just read what was in front of me. Anybody could have. But they didn't." "No. You did." Wynne did not answer. She looked up at the branches of the great oak above her. At the way they had held all night. At the way they were holding now. And she remembered, for the first time in months, her father's voice on this same hill, when she was 7 years old. "This tree has a soul, Wynne. It knows who deserves to stand beneath it." She thought quietly only to herself, "You were right, Papa. This tree did have a soul. And it knew, long before I did, that I was coming home." The sun rose. The water took 2 days to recede. When it was low enough, the survivors climbed down the tree, one at a time, and walked out into what was left of Blackwood Hollow, which was almost nothing, which was a wide plain of mud and splintered wood and things that used to be a town. They found other survivors on other pieces of high ground. A family who had climbed onto the church roof and clung there for 8 hours. 2 men who had ridden their horses up the West Ridge in the middle of the night after Elias Whitaker had banged on their doors. An old woman who had wedged herself into her chimney flue. In total, 31 people had survived, out of a town of 186. The rest were gone. The rest would be found slowly over the next several weeks. In fence lines, in tree branches, in the mud. Blackwood Hollow buried its dead in the church cemetery, the little island of high ground, where the survivors had gathered, and it did so with fewer than half the coffins it needed. There were mass graves. There were markers with only first names. There was a great deal of silence. But no one buried anyone from Win Merritt's tree. Every soul she had pulled across that rope, every single one walked out of the flood alive. Every single one. 3 weeks later, Judge Halloran came. He was a big man, 70 years old, white beard, slow eyes. He rode into what was left of Blackwood Hollow on a gray mare, followed by 2 deputies and a clerk with a satchel of papers. He set up his court outside, on the church cemetery hill. There was no courthouse anymore. There was no church. There was only a hillside, and a wooden table, and 43 folding chairs somebody had salvaged from the schoolhouse ruins. He called the town together. He called Win Merritt to stand. She stood. She was still 19 years old. She was still calloused and thin and tired, but she stood straight, and she looked Judge Halloran in the eye. She told him about the deed. She showed him the paper. He read it, slowly, twice. She told him about her father's book, about the 76 survey, about the underlined passage, about the note in the margin. She told him about Cyrus Thorne, about the voice in the parlor, about the letter in a Denver safe. She did not use Coralie's name. She only said, "A person was being pressured, Your Honor, a person in this town." And she said no more. She told him about Sheriff Cobb, about the man in the black coat asking questions at the smithy, about the saloon, about 12 hours before the flood, when she had begged the sheriff to sound an alarm, and been laughed at. Then Elias Whitaker stood up, without being called, and he confirmed every word of it. Then Odalie Bell stood up, and she confirmed every word. Then Prudence Vale stood, and Cordelia Marsh, and Peter Alcott, and Peter's grandmother Mabel, who could barely walk, but who came forward on her son's arm. Then, one by one, every survivor Win had pulled across that rope stood up, and they all said the same thing. She warned us, and she saved us. Judge Halloran listened. He did not interrupt. When they were finished, he sat quiet for a long time. He looked at the papers on his table. He looked at the ruined valley below. He looked at Win. Then he stood. Cyrus Thorne. Thorne stood up. His fine black coat was gone. He was in borrowed clothes. He looked 10 years older than he had in Coralie's parlor. "Mr. Thorne, you are hereby taken into custody on suspicion of conspiracy to defraud, coercion, and criminal negligence in the matter of the failure of the Blackwood Basin impoundment. You will be transferred to Fort Collins to await trial. Do you understand?" Thorne said yes. Sheriff Cobb. Cobb stood. He did not wait for the judge to speak. He took off his badge. He set it down on the table. He said only, "I will accompany the prisoner to Fort Collins, Your Honor, and I will testify to every dollar I ever took from him. Some men only find their dignity when they have lost everything else." Cobb had lost everything else. Judge Halloran nodded. "So noted." Then the judge turned to Win. "Miss Merritt." "Yes, sir. There is one more matter." He picked up her mother's deed. He held it up so the crowd could see it. "This document names Miss Win Eloan Merritt as sole owner of parcel 14 north of Blackwood Township. Filed May 3, 1869. This deed is valid. It has always been valid. It will continue to be valid. Any claim on that hill by any party, the town, the county, the railroad, or any private person, is hereby denied, dismissed, and ended." The crowd was silent. "That hill," the judge said, "with the tree and the house belongs to Miss Merritt, and to no one else, in perpetuity, under the seal of the state of Colorado." He set the deed down. Then he did something Win would never forget. He reached up. He unpinned the judge's badge from his own coat. He walked around the table. He crossed the trampled grass. He stopped in front of Win Merritt. He said, "Bend your head, child." She did. He pinned the badge to the front of her dress, just for a moment. Then he unpinned it, and he closed her hand around it. "Keep this," he said, "as a reminder that justice does not always come from a court. Sometimes it comes from the people who refuse to be quiet." Win could not speak. Judge Halloran nodded once. He turned and went back to his table. And behind him, on the trampled grass of the church cemetery hill, 31 survivors of Blackwood Hollow stood up. All at once. Not for the judge. For Wynne. 6 months later. Blackwood Hollow was smaller. It was humbler. It was rebuilt with what could be salvaged, and what could be brought in on the new road from Fort Collins. The town had a new sheriff, a woman's brother, from up the valley, chosen at open meeting by hand vote. It had a new general store, run by Elias Whitaker in a rebuilt building 3 blocks from the old one. It had a new church, half the size of the old church, with a bell that had been dredged out of the mud and cleaned and hung again. And at the base of the hill behind the town, in the shadow of the great oak, there was a schoolhouse. It was small, 1 room, whitewashed pine boards, real glass windows donated by Elias Whitaker. A wood stove, donated by Odely Bell's father, the blacksmith. 30 desks, built by the town's men, 1 weekend each. Books, donated from the private libraries of half the surviving families of Blackwood Hollow, and shipped in from Denver and from Fort Collins and from as far as Kansas City by people who had read the story in the newspapers. The schoolhouse taught boys and girls. In the same room, at the same desks, in the same class. When Merritt taught reading, Odely Bell taught writing. Prudence Vale taught geometry because she had discovered, in the spring, that she was a natural at it. Cordelia Marsh taught literature and Latin. And her father, the old schoolteacher, taught arithmetic and geography, and did not charge a dime. Elias Whitaker sat in on Wednesdays, just to listen. He said it made him feel young. The oak still stood. The house still hung in its branches. It had been reinforced now with milled lumber and iron brackets by the men of Blackwood Hollow, every one of whom had come up the hill one Sunday afternoon in April, with hammers and nails, and their hats in their hands, and asked Miss Merritt if they could help. She had said yes. They called the oak the Watch Oak now. Nobody remembered anymore who had started calling it that. It had just always been the name. The tree that had watched. The tree that had held. The tree that had saved. Wynne lived in the house in its branches. She had not come down. She said she never would. One evening in late May, Coralie came up the hill. She did not climb up to the house. She stopped at the base of the tree. She set down a small cloth bundle on a flat stone. Then she looked up at the window. Wynne was there. They looked at each other for a long time. Coralie did not speak. She just nodded once, slowly. Then she turned and walked back down the hill, and she left Blackwood Hollow on the 4 o'clock stagecoach that same afternoon, and she never came back. Wynne climbed down. She opened the cloth bundle. Inside, her mother's wedding ring. Silver. Thin. Warm from being carried in a pocket. And a folded letter, in Coralie's careful hand. The letter was short. Wynne, I do not ask for your forgiveness. I have not earned it, and I will not ask you to give what has not been earned. I only want you to know that the child I left in St. Louis in the spring of 1863, she died there 4 years later. Of a fever. I did not know until this year. Cyrus Thorne knew. He had known for a long time. He used what he knew to make me into something I did not want to be. He used it to make me hurt you. That is not an excuse. There is no excuse. I made my own choices. I threw you into the rain. But I want you to know why I could not bear the sight of you. Because you were 19 and clever and free, and I had been 17 and clever and free, and I had let a man in a black coat make me small. And when I looked at you, I saw the woman I could have been. And I hated her. I do not hate her anymore. I only hope I have not made her impossible. Please keep the ring. It was your mother's. It was never mine. Coralie. Wynne read the letter twice. Then she folded it, and she put it in the same tin box where she kept the deed and the photograph of her mother, and Mercy Bell at the county fair in 1867, and the silver locket with the curl of red hair, and the judge's badge that Judge Halloran had closed into her hand. She slid her mother's ring onto her finger. She climbed back up to her house. She stood at her window. The sun was setting over Blackwood Hollow. The new town lights were coming on, one by one, small, warm, yellow. There was the schoolhouse at the base of the hill. There was the general store. There was the new church. There was a wagon coming down the west road with a family in it, new settlers from Iowa, come to try again in a valley that had been washed clean. Wynne watched them come, and she remembered, she could not help remembering, a night in October. Rain like fists, a door closing behind her. Slow, deliberate. A girl too clever has no place under my roof. She looked down at her hands. Calloused, strong. A ring on one finger. A badge in a tin box behind her. She thought very quietly, only to herself, she thought, I built a place, Papa. I built a place. The wind moved through the leaves of the great oak above her. And when Merritt, 19 years old, alive, stood in the window of the house she had built in the tree that had waited for her, and she watched the lights of Blackwood Hollow come on below her, one by one, in the valley her father had loved, on the land her mother had left her, in the world that had once thrown her out into the rain and had learned at last to let her in.